All righty. For those, okay, here we are. We're back on track. Just for the purpose of the record, today is the 19th of Tammuz, July 18th. We're still tail end of the 18th of the 17th chapter, Kuf Chaf Vav Amud Aleph, turning to Kuf Chaf Vav Amud Beis. That's 126A and B. Well, no, 126B. And we were talking about a conversation that transpires, a class that happens in the doorway, in the entrance of the Reish Galusa. There's more to uncover, there's more to explore about the significance of this location. Suffice it to say, it's clear that the Reish Galusa here, the exilarch, is a patron of the not of the arts, a patron of the Torah study. And we have a number of such discussions that are accounted in this manner. And I believe soon we're going to have another or further answer, I believe, to Reberel's question. I believe so. So we'll stay peeled. Stay tuned. So he says, Allah Rabbi Eliezer, Rashi says, Diva'inon kasher v'tali. It needs to be both tied and taut to be considered in position. Otherwise, it is not affixed, and you cannot do so on Shabbos. Mosif Rav Amram challenged in this very conversation. Rav Amram had a challenge for Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka. What is his challenge? There's a Mishnah that's going to be in a little bit later on in the Gemara. Let's pull it up really briefly, if my internet will load. Talmud Shabbos Kuf Nun Zayin. Kuf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph Mishnah. Hold on, sorry. Here we go. Here is Mafir Nidar B'Shabbos. We'll read it really fast. You can be Matan Neder on Shabbos. You can ask a Shal Nedarim on Shabbos. Poikim Es Hamar. Seal a window. Moedes Matlis. You can measure a Shmata for the purpose of Tahara. Moedes HaMikveh. You're allowed to measure a mikveh. Ma'aseh B'Meya Aviv Sharbi Tzaddik. You have a Shol ben Botnis. There was a story in the time of Rabbi Tzaddik, in the time of Abba Shol ben Botnis. Shapakos Hamar b'Tafiach. They sealed up a window. A ma'or is a place where the light comes in, with a tafiach, with a keli. V'kasher as ha-mikida b'gemi. And they also, let's see here, Rabbi Shleimel translates it, they tied an earthenware shard with grass to be as a measuring tool. Leidam yesh v'gigis pleiseach tefach and lav, to measure if the hole in a keli was the size that would be a problem. Would decommission it as a keli or make it tamei umidivrei. And here's the punchline. From here we learn shapoikikim, that you're allowed to seal, umaididim, you're allowed to measure, v'kaisher m'Shabbos, and you're also allowed to tie a knot on Shabbos. This is the language of the text that's going to be quoted in our Gemara. You see my screen?
Yes.
Where I highlight Midivrei Lamadnu?
We see it, yes.
Okay, good. So here, back in the Gemara, Rav Yitzchak's paskins that were very restrictive about sealing, and Rav Amram challenges him and says, hold on. We have a Mishnah that says, Umidivrei Lamadnu, that we've learned from the earlier citation of the earlier quotation in the Mishnah, which we just read. Shepoikikim umaididim, that you're allowed to see to stuff a window and measure, etc. on Shabbos, which seems to run counter to the assertion of Rav Yitzchak that we're very restricted about poikikim. Let's read Rashi. The Perek Basra, in the final chapter of Mesechah Shabbos, B'mei Aviv Sharab Tzaddik, Mei Abba Shol, Shapakas Amoro, Tapiach, V'kashru, Esa Mekida, B'gemi Leidim Mishbegigas. So Rashi quotes the Mishnah we just read. V'hasa Mefarish La, V'ktani Midivreim Lamadnu. And from there, the Mishnah says, we learn from their words, Shapoikikim Es Hamar, B'davar She'nei Kasher V'tala. You're allowed to stuff a window, even with something that is not fully in position and attached. The koishrim, kasher she'enoi shel kayam lechatchila. A non-permanent knot can be tied not only b'diavad, not only that it's not a biblical problem, but even the Rabbanan permit it. Mikvah umatlanis, and you're allowed to measure certain items on Shabbos that have halachic implications. But the issue that's at hand here is paikakim. And Rabbi Eliezer basically says you can't paikakim. So how will we explain this question? This is a solid question. It seems to derail Rabbi Yitzchak. So let's see. Amalei Abaya. Abaya responds to Rav Amram and says, "My datach, why are you of the opinion that this Mishnah challenges Rabbi Eliezer? You brought this Mishnah as a stira, as a contradiction to Rabbi Eliezer. My datach, why do you think it's not Rabbi Eliezer? Mishum dektani stama. Let's read Rashi. My datach, the moisvis the Rabbi Yitzchak nafcha miha, that you challenge Rabbi Yitzchak nafcha from this Mishnah. Matzi l'shnoi elcha hamani rabbanani. He could answer very easily. This Mishnah is a different author. This is the Rabbanan who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. Or you're bringing this to tell us that halachically we should not paskin right like Rabbi Eliezer. Negar nami stamahi. Well, we have another Mishnah which seems to run contrary to Rabbi Eliezer, and yet we're okay with paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Afilu hachi masa Rav. And although, I'm sorry, no. Negar nami istamahi Rashi katani lavis asam lam bahak Rabbi Eliezer asur. We have another Mishnah which follows the viewpoint of Rabbi Eliezer. That's restrictive. So let me just explain. We have a Mishnah with an author, and we have a Mishnah that contains a debate. We have a Mishnah that just says the halacha without any other opinions. And so sometimes if there's a Mishnah that has no argument, generally speaking, we're going to follow that Mishnah because it is a stam Mishnah. It just is a neutrally quoted Mishnah that says one opinion, that's going to be the halacha. Well, Abaya says you can't challenge Rabbi Yitzchak, who paskins like Rabbi Eliezer from a stam Mishnah, because we have different Mishnahs that don't synchronize, that are both a stam Mishnah. So you can't. So Yitzchak nafka paskins like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Amram says, I have a Mishnah that says different. So what? We paskin like a different Mishnah. So the Gemara answers, Vafilu hachi masai Rav. Although we have a Mishnah that is stam like Rabbi Eliezer, there's always a preference when a Mishnah includes a masai Rav. What is masai Rav? Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it. An action is greater because there's a story in the Mishnah that we quoted. This Mishnah here includes a story. Ma'aseh b'mei aviv. You see that? And so although there's a Mishnah that just weighing two Mishnahs, you might be inclined to paskin in a lenient direction. I'm sorry, in a strict direction. A Mishnah that contains a story is of greater significance. This is, by the way, a famous language in halachic literature. We'll find there's a reference many times you'll see to Masa Rav, a story, a halacha that's portrayed in a story. And so Masa Rav, there's a lot of weight to a halachic anecdote that includes a story, even more than just a statement.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm mistaken, but the Mishnah you went back to, you have another difference. It seemed there they were talking about temporary closures, and here we've been talking about permanent shutters putting back. I might be wrong, but I don't know. I just had that feeling as you were reading fast.
You're saying the vibe that the Mishnah conveys here is something of temporary nature, because it sounds like they're reacting on the fly, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to our Mishnah, which sounds like a more of a permanent. I understand I hear why we would infer that, but I think with a careful reading, we wouldn't necessarily pick that up. This Mishnah in general, the Mishnah in Kuf Nun Zayin, I think accurately portrays the reality of the pekika of the ceiling in our Mishnah too, because we're talking about if it's unattached, that if it's unattached, there's probably some degree of flexibility or urgency. But Beryl, you are consistently shitascha. You're being consistent with your earlier position, which is that the shutter, even if it's detached, it needs to have the form of a shutter, right?
Yes.
So you're being consistent. So sometimes, many times, we'll find that different achronim, different important commentaries on the Gemara will have a consistent mahalach through and through. So you're being consistent, but I'm not certain. I'm not certain that's the case. But I hear your point, and let's see if we can find any clues one or another. I think if you paskin that you can do an unattached thing, and even an unattached shutter, then it's going to be a whole lot more flexible and on the fly, more reactive. Because you're going to imagine that if there was a permanent shutter, it would be somewhat affixed. I may be wrong. But bottom line, so let me just remind you. We have Rav Yitzchak Nafcha who gives a strict psak. He says, follow Rabbi Elazar. Rav Amram challenges him from a Mishnah. Abaye tries to say that you can't challenge him from this Mishnah because whatever weight, whatever punch this Mishnah delivers, I'll bring you another Mishnah that punches from the other angle. And then the Gemara concludes, no, Abaye, you have not done a good job. The reason why this is such a compelling question is because it comes from a Mishnah with a Maisa. A Mishnah that includes a story, that gives us a lot of weight. Now, indeed, and that's in Takawi Paskin to be Mako, if you recall, lenient, not like Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, who's strict, but more like Rav Amram, who quotes the Mishnah, who conveys what is the halachic consensus, that is to be lenient and to be matir, attaching a shutter, even if it is not affixed to the building. Maisa Rav. There's a lot of weight to a Mishnah that includes a Maisa. And also more broadly in the halachic literature, you might have a machlokes, but if there's an anecdote which recalls a specific posek who either lamaisa instructed to act in such a way, or in his practice, in his own manner, acted in a certain way, that carries a lot of weight. There's a big asterisk, there's a big limitation to the value of a story, which is sometimes you don't know, sometimes you'll see a behavior, but if you don't know the background of the event, you don't know. So for example, you might see, the famous joke where a person looks outside the window on Shabbos and they see the rabbi and Rebbetzin get into a car and the car's blasting music and they're driving at top speed, like they're practically drag racing. The person's saying, "Oh, Shanda." The rabbi left the religion. He's taking his wife for a ride on Shabbos in the community with music blasting. And then afterwards, they find out Mazel Tov, the Rebbetzin had a child. And of course, you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos for child labor and other medical emergencies. So the rabbi gets into the car that they borrowed from their neighbor, and it was blasting the local pop station. But on Shabbos, you're allowed to drive to the hospital. There's no heter to tinker with the radio. So they have to leave the radio blasting with whatever, at whatever decibel point and with whatever kind of music was playing. And so, of course, there are many, many limitations to a nice story, which is you don't always know the background and the context. But in a scenario, let's say where the Mishnah records a halachic psak and gives the direction of the story, well, then we're going to give it a whole lot of weight.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Maybe the point that's being made in recounting a story is that the rabbi did that because sometimes he'll paskin for you what's acceptable, but not at a level that he would accept. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, this is true too. In matters of practical halacha, especially nowadays where there's sometimes some latitude within the halachic community, if that's the right language. So you might have, let's say, a posek that is inclined to be more machmir, but the general principles of halacha gives room for leniency. So a rabbi doesn't only take into account the essence of the matter, but they also take into account the background and the person's capacity and where they are in life. Or let's say sometimes there's a particular challenge that a person is going through, and the halacha gives room for leniency under special circumstances. And so you're correct that a posek will generally not just answer the question, but they'll take into account the questioner when there is latitude. So, for example, yesterday was Shivas B'Tammuz Nidcha. So a person asked the rabbi, can I fast or do I push off the fast? Well, it's not a single answer. To a person that's well and healthy and has no other considerations, the answer is you better fast. If a person has a medical, concern or weakness or other kinds of condition, or they need to take medication, and then they'll ask the rabbi, well, then the answer will be a whole lot different depending on the circumstances. So that is 100% true that many, so for example, today, a posek, if you call them and ask them a question, many times they'll give you an answer, but if you'll ask them, can I publicize this? They'll say you should not, because it'll mislead people to not actually know the correct halachic practice for themselves.
Rabbi,
yes.
We can summarize this discussion how to deal with different missionaries that seemingly contradict to each other. The Art Scroll edition of our Gemara says that we assign more weight to the story that describes the action, because the rabbi who expresses just the opinion expresses a local opinion that can be changed with time with different circumstances. But when the rabbi gives the opinion on the basis of the action, it means that he gave much more consideration to the situation, taking into account all possible circumstances and important points. And this is why the the story with action gets more weight when you compare different missions.
Yes. Ashukar. Yes. 100%. Thank you for sharing that. In the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz, even though the two Mishnahs are of equal weight by other parameters, since one of them not only cites an unattributed opinion, but also a story, an incident, the source is decisive. All right, let's see a new Mishnah. And this is the final Mishnah that will conclude the 17th chapter of Masechah Shabbos. Oh.
Who is that?
Here. Kol Kisuyei HaKelim. Here's the new Mishnah. The final Mishnah of this chapter, discussing our favorite pot covers, keli, covers of a keli. Kol Kisuyei HaKelim. If a cover of a keli has a handle, Nitolim b'Shabbos, they can be carried on Shabbos, they can be used on Shabbos. Inferred is absent a keli cover. What would be the halacha? Inferred is that you shouldn't carry one that doesn't have a cover. Let's see. The Gemara will discuss. Amar Rabbi Yosi. Yosi says, Ahmed Varamorim. In which context do we say that it is essential to have a handle? Bikisoi karkois. When the cover is for something that is in the ground. Rashi, kigon kisoi bar vidus, a pit or a built, how do we call it? Hole. They have a keboina. Unless it has a handle, because otherwise it looks like boina. You're building onto a structural, you're handling a part of a structure. Because when it has a handle, it's clear that it is meant to be frequently taken. What comes to mind is, the pothole covers? The pothole covers don't really have a handle to my knowledge. Actually, maybe some of them do. It's like receded inside, but I think most of them don't have a. And indeed, they're only removed under specific needs of repair that have much more of a structural relationship than a keli kind of handling. Kisa kelim, Rabbi Yosi says, when it comes to the cover of a keli, then whether it has a handle or not, They can be handled. So we have a machlokes. The Tana Kama says you always need to have a handle. Rabbi Yossi says no. The only time a handle is warranted is in a case where it's part of a structure. And when it's part of a structure, maybe we will convey the halachic status of structure to the pot cover too. When you have a handle, it's evident that it's meant to be taken frequently and with ease, and it doesn't have the appearance of a structure, and therefore it can be handled. Rabbi Yossi says otherwise it need not have a cover to be considered muksa. Let's see the Gemara. It's a short Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Shela, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. In explaining our Mishnah, that says that when you have a handle, it can be carried. This is the first opinion of the Mishnah. Vihu sheyesh toiras kli aleihem. When do we say that you can use a handle? I'm sorry, a cover that has a handle. That's if it has the halachic status of a keli, meaning it has other uses, which it becomes a kli because of the other opportunities to use. Rashi, if these covers have other uses, but a cover by its very essence, you don't become a keli by just being a cover. If it's available for other uses, then it would be considered a kli. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yechon. And by the way, we know that Rabbi Yechanan is generally very strongly in the pro-kli camp. To handle something on Shabbos, it needs to absolutely be classified as a kli. Let's understand now the kuli alma kisei kakais. Hang on.
Just keeps on going away. I don't know why. Anyways, I don't know who keeps on texting you. But this person just keeps on
Hold on. There you go. Please take it far away so it doesn't hurt. All right. Sorry. Everybody agrees. In our Mishnah, both the first opinion, the Tana Kama, who says it needs to have a handle, and the second opinion, which says whether it has a handle or not, everybody agrees that kisoi karkais, if it is a cover for something in the ground, im yeshlem beis achiza in iloiloi. If it has a handle, you can handle it. If it does not have a handle, you cannot handle it. Kisei kelim. And when it comes to other keli covers, afagav de einlam beis achiza. Even though it doesn't have a cover, it is allowed to be handled. Let's read Rashi. Mishum de ukmar Rav Yechanan b'sheyesh teres kli alehem. Itzricha le'lemeimar dechi pligi rabbanon bekelim dechavrinu ba'ara pligi. The Gemara explains that what Rabbi Yechanan is saying is that if it's attached to the ground, it has to be considered a kli by virtue of its handle. Ilu kelim de'alma afagav de les lukli chisuyim beis achiza. Other kelim, even if it does not have a handle, metatali, they can be carried. The kiva and the beikot teres kli alehem kaimi, being that they're there for something that is considered a clean mali ika beis achiza, mali leika beis achiza, or the kisa kem lechavar karka kagain tana v'chiraim with the pligim mishum medama mixas the kisa bardas. All right. So Rabbi Yechanan's comment, according to the Gemara, is being pretty expansive. Everyone agrees if it's attached to the ground and it has a handle, it's permissible. And for other kelim, even without a handle, you can carry it. Kipligi, where is the machlokes? The kelim, the chavrino be'ara, with a keli that's fused to the ground. What would be an example of a keli that's fused to the ground? Anyone remember recently we talked about something that gets fused to the ground?
The oven.
The oven.
Yeah.
So for example, an oven, the chavrino ba'ara, which is fused, it's attached to the ground. Mar sovar gazrinon. The Tana Kama says we make a gzeira. We create a halachic association between the Rabbanan, make an association between a pothole cover and something that's attached to the ground. Umar Savar and Rabbi Yossi says, like Gazrina, we do not make a gezerah. This is one way of understanding the Mishnah. So I'm sorry, just to go real fast, two opinions in the Mishnah. The first opinion says all you need is a handle. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, the statement, all you need is a handle, is about kisei karkais. But other kelim don't need a handle. Comes Rav Yochanan and says the whole debate is about if it has if the
I don't know why.
sorry folks. There you go. Long story short, we're talking about something that's fused to the ground, but otherwise, we agree that if it's a keli, it does not need to have a handle. Mishnah Chrina, another way to understand the machlokes, ki pligi b'kisoi taner. More explicitly, the whole machlokes is about the cover of a taner, an oven. Mar medanoli the kisei karka. One, the Tanakama is restrictive and says a taner, an oven that's fused to the ground. We look at it like the ground. And Rav Yossi says, no, we look at this like any other keli, and it's allowed to be handled. Hadron alach kol hakelim. With this, we formally conclude the 17th chapter of Masechet Shabbos. And with Hashem's help, we start now a new chapter. I just want to read the first line, and then I want to take a moment to re-explore the Gemara we just finished. The next chapter is called Mefanim. If I'm not mistaken, much of the discussion of our Mishnah are matters that are only the Rabbanan. And we discuss when the Chazal give leniency to their own Gezerah and when not. And so we'll talk about a number of issues. Initially, we're talking about moving items on Shabbos that maybe Chazal would ideally not want to have us handling on Shabbos, but they created permission for specific purposes. But now I want to go back for a moment to the previous Gemara. What I want to do, because I know this Gemara may have come across as a little confusing, maybe I rushed through it. So I want to take a look fast at the Shulchan Aruch and see how he codifies this lemaisa. Any comments first? Questions? Clarifying?
Rabbi, all these rules, do they differ very much on Yontif?
I do not believe so, but that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you where it might differ on Yontif. On Yontif, you're certainly allowed to handle elements of cooking. And so if there would be a restriction, so for example, I imagine, and I that even though the opinion that's machmir about it, the cover of an oven, most likely they would be inclined to be more lenient on Shabbos, but I don't want to give that answer with finality. But anyways, our Gemara, I believe, is going to take generally a more lenient position. But let's see how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So again, the Shulchan Aruch, this is not always the ideal use of the Shulchan Aruch, but in this instance, I want to get it, the essence of our Gemara as it's incorporated in practically. So let's see. Kisoi bar vidus, the cover for a structural item, a hole, a pit, there's a better word, but it'll come to me. Eini tolim, they cannot be handled on Shabbos. Muksa. Elo im kein yesh lahem beis achiza, unless it has a handle. The ozmuchach, the handle creates evidence, shu kli, that this cover is a kli, and therefore it can be handled. The handle makes it flexible, gives it other uses. Bishal kelim, if it's a cover for a keli, even if they are attached to the ground, a clear rejection of the more strict opinion that would say that you could not handle the cover of a tanor. Remember, you can handle them, even if it does not have a handle. But then it would be essential for this cemented item that you have to actually designate that it's going to have a use on Shabbos, or that they were used prior to Shabbos in an alternate use. And now the oven cover or the other item has become designated as flexible for other uses. This is a very interesting caveat. The kisoi chaviyos, the cover to a barrel, then he says the cover of a barrel which is submerged into the ground and I suppose fused, it needs a handle. So the Shulchan Aruch actually doesn't give us perfect clarity. What we do know is that generally speaking, a cover for a keli is not muksa, la maisa. Where it gets complicated, as the Gemara indicates, is once it's attached to the ground, or if it's actually part of the ground. When it's part of the ground, it absolutely needs to have a handle. When it's fused to the ground, it gets complicated. You can use it without a beis achiza, you can use it without a handle, but you need to do something more than just, you need to do something to designate it as functionally flexible before Shabbos. So by designating it or actually using it for an alternate use, that is sufficient to make that keli useful on Shabbos. This is the Shulchan Aruch's rendering or take on our Gemara. Let's start the new Mishnah. And let's start the new Mishnah. So as we know, generally speaking, we're very clear and strong about the fact that on Shabbos, what's prohibited is melacha, something that is classified as a constructive, specialized work. In the very beginning of the Masechta, we quoted a number of different exact nuanced definitions of malacha, but a popular one is constructive, that it makes, so it alters something. The act alters the material with which one is acting. So that would be consistent with grain to bread. You're harvesting, you're changing it, you're sifting it, you're changing it, you're crushing it, you're separating it with wool, with hide, you're processing it with letters, you're also making, and again, then when it comes to, and we actually explain that's why carrying, if you recall, I think it was Tosfos says that carrying is a big chiddush, because with carrying, unlike all the other malachas, you're not really being constructive, you're not changing anything in the essence of the matter. But generally speaking, malachas are defined, they are specific, and there's creative construction. There's something that's changing. To underscore that fact, we say hypothetically, a person could dance around the house for 25 hours straight, carrying their couch on their back, and that would not be a malacha. That would not be at all biblically prohibited on Shabbos, although it would be a whole lot more tiresome than, say, if you were writing in your journal, or if you were, I don't know, any other malacha that's not that labor intensive. So we do that to underscore the fact that malacha has a specific definition. However, ultimately, Chazal do not want us to be involved in strenuous activities or other types of activities which are somewhat akin to malacha. But in those prohibitions, Chazal also create leniencies for certain matters, as we're going to see over here. Mifanim on Shabbos, you know what you're allowed to do? You're allowed to move. But mifanim doesn't just mean move, it means remove. You can move something, you can remove afilu arba v'chomesh kupais shel teva, and you can carry 4 or 5 baskets, bushels of straw, v'shel tevua, of grain, mipnei ha'archim, in order to create space for guests. Let's read Rashi. Mifanim im sarach lim koiman. In the olden times, you had a pretty small home, and the home was a very, very multi-purpose space. It was the ultimate flexible space. And so it could be your bedroom, your kitchen, your dining room, your living room, your workspace, your home office, your warehouse, etc., etc. So let's say you have baskets full of grain, but you want to host guests. Let's read Rashi over here. You need space for guests. Or you want to give a shir and you want to turn this space into a base medrash. And there's no problem that there's going to be extra tircha, extra strain and effort, which is not ideally done on Shabbos. But you can't move them around for the purpose of a storeroom. And Rashi says, the Gemara is going to explain what it means that you're moving around the items to be in Eitzar. So this is the first halacha of the Mishnah. Furthermore, Mifanim Truma Tahira, you're allowed to move Truma. What is Truma? Truma is the grains that were gifted to the Kohen Midaraisa, it's a biblical obligation, and the kohen eats them into her impurity, and they must be preserved into impurity. So you're allowed to move truma to hayra. Rashi. How far will we stretch to say that you're allowed to move something that is accessible and available on Shabbos? Elu truma to hayra. For example, truma that is tahar, which is either consumed by the kohen or his household, and even can be used with its straw. It could be handled, even though it's only fit for a kohen. About truma tameya, but if it's impure, law, you can't handle it, as the Mishnah will tell us, because there is no possible use on Shabbos. Udemai, what's demai? Demai is grain that we're not sure if it had its gifts to the kohen taken. Umay sarishain, and similarly the first tithe, which goes to the Levi. Levi gets my sarishain, the first tithe of the grain. Shenitlu trumasai, so long as the Levi gave the kohen his share. Umaser sheni, and grain which is meiser sheni. V'hektish, or it was designated to the Beis Hamikdash. Sheniftu, that it was exchanged. So basically, the way it worked on the time of the Beis Hamikdash is Jewish farmers had a lot of taxes, had a lot of what? Well, I'm almost finished. I'm going to help you. Okay, I'm almost finished here. So 10%, you had to give a kohen a fraction. Lamaisa, it was generally considered 1/50th or 2%. Then you had to give 10% to the Levi. And then there was an additional 10% that was set aside to be brought to Yerushalayim and consumed there to promote the economy of Jerusalem, etc. But if you couldn't carry, let's say you lived up in Nahariya, and it's very difficult to carry all your grain that you harvested from Nahariya to Yerushalayim, especially when you didn't have the Rakevet Yisrael. So what would you do? You could sell it or exchange, not sell, you could exchange the value of the grain to coins with an addition, a little fee, and then you take the money to Yerushalayim, and then you spend that money buying food and other permissible uses in Jerusalem. So if it was nifta, if it was exchanged, so now it's edible, you can move it. As well as dry beans, which were quite bitter and not always edible. You could feed it to your goats. But what can't you carry? You cannot move on Shabbos. Grain, which is tevel, it's definitely not had its trumas and meisters taken. Nor the Levi's share if he didn't give the kohen his part. Okay. Nor could a person handle meiser sheni, stuff that's meant to be brought up to Jerusalem, or something that was designated to the Beis Hamikdash, if it was not transferred, if the kedusha was not transferred to money. Nor may one move around luf, which I see Rabbi Steinsaltz here translates as arum, nor mustard, presumably because they are not at all edible on their own. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel mater beluf. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says you can actually handle luf, which Rashi says is a kind of kitnius, a kind of legume, which cannot be eaten raw. It can be eaten by a raven. Why are you worried about feeding a raven? So Rashi says, you have very wealthy people that apparently the status thing was to have trained, maintained ravens that were bred for I don't know what. I'm not sure what Arvim L'Gdula means. We can revisit that tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem. So my dear friends, we've started a new Mishnah. The Mishnah starts with items that can and cannot be carried on Shabbos. There's no biblical prohibition to tircha. It's not a malacha. And yet, our Mishnah here is discussing how stamazo, you shouldn't be schlepping stuff around. But if there's a specific use and it's not off limits to you on Shabbos, well, then it could be handled. We are almost done with the Mishnah. Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we'll finish off the Mishnah and jump into the Gemara. Mazel tov, dear friends. Once again, 17 chapters in our account, 17 chapters down. This is an incredible accomplishment, a sign of dedication, commitment, and a wonderful celebration. Mazel tov, l'chaim, l'chaim. May Hashem give everyone here the koyach, the health, the strength, and the good circumstances that we can continue our journey throughout the entire Talmud. And with Hashem's help, before long, we will make a siyum on Masechah Shabbos, and then we will throw a party to end all parties. Be'ezer Hashem. For now, thank you all. Have a wonderful day. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Be'ezras Hashem, same time, same link, hopefully in good health and good circumstances. Let's pray for only good news in Eretz Yisrael, for Klal Yisrael, wherever they may be. Big Ashakayach. Stand by for today's Chumash at the same link in just a moment. Oh, and thank you for your patience as we got offline and back online. Shkoyach. Thank you.